You may have noticed a troubling shift in the zeitgeist. You probably noticed it in your group chats, your Twitter feed, or even at the dinner table. There's this growing feeling that it's okay to be bigoted again. For a while, we had a social contract. You could be as grumpy as you wanted if you were grumpy to everybody, but you didn't get to blame the Jews or the foreigners for your personal failures without being looked at as some kind of dinosaur. But lately, that contract's being shredded. We've seen the rise of a neo-right that doesn't just flirt with bigotry, it treats it like a badge of honor. If you're a politically correct progressive, you might think that a solution is a massive government agency led by wizards of smart from places like Berkeley and Columbia University to police hate speech and cancel everyone with a heterodox opinion. If you're a traditional religious conservative, you might be horrified, but you're also stuck in a movement where the loudest voices are currently obsessed with blood and soil. But there's a smarter alternative way to look at this phenomenon, a way that realizes that bigotry isn't just a moral failure, it's a collectivist trap. And it's a trap that the current nativist wave is using to lock us into a very dangerous future. I invite you to look at a recent analysis from the Cato Institute. The article is titled "Nationalism is Driving the Neo-Right's Virulent Anti-Semitic Turn." I'll put the link to the article in the description. It makes a point that we often miss. Nationalism is not patriotism. Real nationalism, as defined by the neo-right, I'm not saying that it's real, but that's what they think is real, is about us versus them. It's about defining the nation as a specific ethnic or racial group, native-born and, of course, evangelical Christians, and everyone else is an outsider or a threat. Once you adopt that zero-sum mindset, bigotry isn't a bug, it's a feature. If the nation is struggling, the nationalist doesn't look at complex things like fiscal policy or market shifts. They look for a conspiracy. And throughout history, the oldest, laziest conspiracy theory is to blame the Jews. The Cato article points out that as the MAGA movement has shifted from limited government, which is what they always run on, but do the opposite, to a national greatness nostalgia, it has opened the door for the alt-right and the neo-Nazis to walk right in. When you define a hierarchy of Americanist, you are creating a state that is fundamentally intrusive. You're telling the government, hey, please decide who's a real American and who isn't. And once the government has the power to rank people by their ancestry or religion, you've just handed a loaded gun to a bully. Now, does anyone think that a government run by people who believe in the great replacement memes is going to be small or efficient? The current MAGA movement has created a permission structure for nativism. It's edgy now to be anti-Jewish. It's countercultural to be a bigot. But here's the joke. There's nothing more establishment than a government using tribalism to distract you while they run up the national debt. This neo-right claims to be anti-establishment, but they want to use the intrusive power of the state to enforce their social vision. They want to use the Department of Justice to target their enemies and the immigrants or people who just look like they might be immigrants to their ethnocentrism as victims for their toughness theater. It's a lack of intellectual honesty. They claim to love freedom, but they only want freedom for people who look, act, and pray exactly like them. That's not freedom. That's a country club with the police force. Maybe, I don't know, Mar-a-Lago? So how do we push back without becoming the thought police that the politically correct left is so fond of? The alternative is a servant government model based on individualism. Individualism is the ultimate enemy of bigotry. Why? Because a bigot looks at a group. An individual looks at a person. A real servant government doesn't care about your pedigree or your bloodline. It treats everyone as an equal before the law. It's a model of social tolerance. You want to live your life in a way that I think is weird? Fine. As long as you aren't hurting me, it's none of my business, and it's definitely none of the government's business. You don't get to restrict speech like the left with their microaggression crusades, bullying everyone into submission and calling it anti-bullying, or like the right with their book banning silliness, gutting out school and public libraries. You don't get to compel speech like these Bible thumpers throughout the South trying to mandate the posting of the Ten Commandments throughout government and school buildings, or like the leftists demanding that everyone adapt to this, thee, him, her, they, them nonsense. We need to nurture the notion that leaving people alone is the most sophisticated political philosophy we have. We don't need a government that protects Christian nationalism, and we don't need a government that enforces progressive wokeness. We need a government free from these insane culture wars, protecting property and individuals from crime and corruption, impartially settling disputes, maintaining a common infrastructure, and then leaving people alone. The alt-right and the neo-right want to purge. They want to define America down to a tiny exclusionary box. On the other hand, some in the radical left seem to be hostile to the very idea of America as a cohesive nation. We reasonable people need to resist both of these ideologies. We're a nation of 340 million individuals, each with our own story. The duopoly wants you to pick a side in their culture war because as long as you're fighting your neighbor, you aren't noticing that the government is broken and intrusive. Break this duopoly. Embrace a humble, effective government. And remember, bigotry isn't tough. It's just the lowest form of collectivism. If someone tells you that if you don't like one party, you have to embrace the other, they're a liar. The system being set up to protect and enshrine only two parties that both really do the same thing, borrow, BS, and buy, is a scam, and you ought to be tired of being fleeced by both of these bands of brigands before it's too late. The Bolshevik Democrats and the MAGA Republicans have created a duopoly and have our country in a stranglehold. We're going to continually crawl through the same crap if we don't break this duopoly and as citizens enforce political and intellectual plurality. They say people get the government they deserve. So if we sit on our asses and accept that our republic is being replaced by a personality cult, we deserve what's coming. I'm Lauren Moss, and this is E Pluribus Unum, out of many one. Thanks for listening. Give us a like and subscribe, please. It helps. And what do you think? Am I right? Tell me in the comments. If I'm wrong, tell me why. I want to hear from you.
E Pluribus Unum. With Lauren Moss Unum. With Lauren Moss Unum. E Pluribus Unum.